Welcome to the Wealthy Speaker Podcast, the show that offers you tips and strategies to help speakers build the business of their dreams. Now here's your host, 30-year industry veteran and business coach, Jane Atkinson.
Well, welcome everyone to the Wealthy Speaker Podcast. Today we are talking about one of the most important things when it comes to speaking, and that is the power of storytelling. Our special guest is story coach Jill Davis. Welcome to the podcast, Jill.
Thanks, Jane. I'm really glad to be here today. It's always fun to hear and work with your speakers.
Well, that's how I know you, actually. You are coaching a few of our clients right now. They are raving about you. And so I wanted to kind of dig down into some of the things that you talk about. But before we go there, tell everybody a little bit about your background and how you ended up as a presentation skills coach.
Thank you, Jane. It's one of those stories that I think most of us who have any years behind us, we always go back to what we know the best, right? And
Yes.
I grew up evangelical Pentecostal, and every little girl who sits, or every child who sits in one of those sermons knows the stories. We hear the stories over and over. I grew up with all of the fables and the morality stories with good morals and all of those. So I love those. I also had two parents who told really good stories and an aunt who was the best storyteller. Over my lifetime, I ended up in other places, but that's where it started.
Okay.
And it ended where I am now.
So you did various jobs throughout you had some interesting jobs. Tell us a little bit about those.
Well, I don't know if all of them are jobs or not, Jane, but I married really young. I was just 19. I had 4 kids. I married into the United States Air Force, and I
Okay.
spent the first 25 years of my adulthood traveling the country and moving and having 4 kids.
And
But
I
in
think we
that,
can call that a job. Okay. So,
I thought it was.
taking care of 4 kids and moving. How often did you move? Like every 4 years or something?
Oh, no, I don't think we were ever at a base for 4 years.
Oh,
Typically, it was
wow.
18 months to 24 months.
Oh my gosh.
So in those 25 years, we moved 18 times.
That's a job. That's a job for a military wife. So then after that,
So, well, in the military, though, that's really where I started speaking publicly because I was a
okay,
public speaker before I was a story coach.
okay,
And I was married to someone who is now a retired general. And
okay,
so as a military spouse, you have to do a lot of speaking to people. By
okay.
nature, I'm introverted. So telling stories was an easy way to get around that. And so I did a
Oh,
lot of storytelling there. I went into sales, and we all know that a really excellent salesperson is a really good storyteller. And the more
absolutely.
story you tell around sales, the better salesperson you will be.
I love it. I love it. Okay. Well, so let's talk about when we break down when people first come to you, do they tend, this is just an assumption I'm making, so it may be wrong. Do they tend to have more teaching than stories? Is that typically what you'll see in the beginning?
Absolutely, especially if they're coming out of the corporate world.
Mm,
It's very data driven, it's very factual, and that works great in the corporate world because you've got those continuing education units you have to get. So you
right.
have to have those data points, but it doesn't hold the attention of the audience.
Yeah, it doesn't grab them. And so I think we probably already know, but why would you say that story or uh, the power of story in a presentation makes it so much more effective?
Well, for me personally, and I'll tell you a little background on that. For me personally, we know that story from the very beginning of time is how we as a human race make sense of the world. And it
Hmm.
doesn't matter if we're making sense of a difficult situation someone went through or making sense of how to become a better leader. It's always through story that we learn the best. And it's just the way our brains work.
Right, right. And every type of speaker. Okay, so let's say you have an incredibly dry subject, something kind of statistical like, or maybe it's security or what, who is storytelling for and who is it not for?
Well, I would tell you storytelling is for everyone. And I'd love to tell you a story about my one of my four kiddos is
Okay.
a literal rocket scientist. I won't mention his name because he has a high security clearance.
Ooh.
He is in one of those positions where he is a astronautical engineer. So
Okay.
very, very heady, very data driven.
Hmm.
However, because he is my child and he grew up in the world that we grew up in, he
Yes.
has taken that. He still does all of his engineering stuff, but they task him constantly to talk to the top generals and the top decision makers because he explains the difficult thing through story. He always
Mm.
takes a difficult concept like, comparing a rocket, for me, a rocket ship to a lawnmower in my backyard or a party that I'm having. He knows how to hit it home. And that's so story is for everybody. If an astronautical rocket scientist can use it to improve his career, everybody can.
100%. So I know that there are lots of different types of stories.
Mhm.
So let's say you're coaching a client on how to, I tend to think about the biggest, most important stories as the opening and the closing. Do you feel that way as well?
No, I would disagree a little bit on that.
Okay.
I do
Do tell.
believe that it can be that way.
Okay.
I think for every speaker, it's depending on who their audience is. If we
Okay.
don't know the audience, we cannot create a story around it.
Okay.
We can teach, accessorizing to PTA members, but to teach accessorizing to somebody who's unhoused, wrong audience, right? So we
Mhm.
have to have the right audience. That's number one. Then the point or the impact that the speaker wants determines on where you're going to start the story. At that point, that becomes your most important story, what impact you want. And I really do believe in Stephen Pressfield's concept of the clothesline, where you have the two most important stories memorized for your entire presentation. And
Mhm.
you have it memorized so well, though, that it sounds like you don't have it memorized.
Right. It's kind of like in your bones.
Exactly.
So you're saying that the most important stories might not be at the beginning and the end. They might be in different places.
Exactly. And
Okay.
sometimes the stories that we start with only bring us to the middle of the story, which is the most important place. Then we wrap it around. And for brand new storytellers, Jane, I always recommend there's lots of ways to structure a story, but the
Okay.
easiest way for a brand new storyteller, not a brand new speaker, but somebody who's new to storytelling, is
Okay.
start in the middle at your beginning of your story is the middle of the actual story. Then
Okay.
go backwards into time and start at the beginning and then conclude with where you are today.
Oh,
Because
interesting.
if you do chronological order, and I see this all the time, Jane, I've coached so many people through this who want to do chronological, unless there's a real reason for that. People who do chronological get stuck so deeply in the minutia that we
Yes.
lose the impact of the story.
Okay, that is really good. So let's take an example. Maybe it's like a hardship story.
Mhm.
Somebody who finds themselves on the stage and they're going through well, I don't know. When do you tell a story? Because maybe if you're going through it in that moment, being on the stage and telling it isn't the right timing. Right?
No,
Maybe it's when it's in your rear view mirror. So they do talk about no therapy from the stage. Can you
yeah.
speak to that a little bit? Maybe it's
I I'll, I'll hit both of those points, Jane, because they're
okay.
both so important. I'm kind of giggling because obviously you've worked with speakers and you know what happens. But I teach really strongly to speak from the scar, not the wound. And when
Oh.
I'm working with my speakers, what I help them to understand is if your emotions come up past your throat into your
Hmm.
face and you feel like you're going to ugly cry, it's not time for that story. And it may never be time for that story.
You're
If
not
you bring
healed
it
enough yet.
Yeah,
Yes.
if you bring it up a little bit and you have tears, that's fine. I'll teach you how to work through that, and it
Okay.
connects you deeper with the audience.
Yeah. When somebody even implies that they're emotional, if they pause just to kind of gather themselves, I'm with them. I am having a really hard time holding it together if I can feel that they're having a hard time holding it together. And I think that you want to be not too performative, if that's the right word. Um, let's not plan tears if they're not going to be authentically driven in the moment. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And there are stories that we tell over and over and over, especially if you're a good speaker and you've really polished your presentation and you don't change it every time, because the more we change it, the more messy it gets. There are going to be times where you may have just had an encounter. I tell a story when I'm teaching how to tell a story about my father. My
Okay.
father's been gone for 8 years. Not
Okay.
a big deal. I miss him deeply. He was in his 90s when he passed. And I
Hmm.
teach about data versus story. And I read a story that my daughter told about my dad. And like today, as I'm talking to you, it's easy peasy. I could tell you all about my dad, but on the anniversary of his death or close to it, or if I've just been out at the farm, it brings up tears. But those tears are okay
Yeah.
because I know how to manage them. And
Right.
they're authentic.
And I love that this term, speak from the scar, not the wound. If the wound is too fresh, you might need a little bit more time. And I have clients who are going through stuff in this very moment, and they're thinking to themselves, this is going to make a good story one day. And it's hard to know how much space do you put between, before you start actually telling it.
And one thing I really believe about that, Jane, is there are some stories that are never supposed to be told. Those are the
Oh, do
places
tell.
that
What?
what
Which one?
stories?
Which
The
one?
ones that are so deep in you that you may have healed it, but you don't want to share it to create the trauma in your audience.
Okay. Yes, I'm thinking there are some stories that are just too
Mhm.
traumatic. Now, are there some stories that just aren't appropriate with any particular type of audience, like something that you would steer clear of?
I think again, you have to know your audience. So you can't
Mhm.
just put a blanket out there. But you certainly, actually, I just saw a movie yesterday, My Dead Friend Zoe, one of the best movies I've seen in ages. I'm a big movie girl. My mama was a movie theater usher when she in the 40s. And
Okay.
if I had been a veteran who hadn't done a lot of work, that was the wrong story for that audience.
Right.
It's just you can't bring in your story. When I'm talking about some of my more difficult things, I polish them for the audience because some audiences aren't ready for it.
Yeah. Okay.
Don't have to expose our underbelly to impact an audience.
Oh, I think that's a really good line and worthy of remembering. They don't know. Also, I think people are like, well, I can't. Some people don't give any of the backstory, so they're withholding. And then some people give so much of it that they've kind of exposed their underbelly, like you said. So it's interesting. Okay, so for the person who has this huge background, but they don't speak it on stage. Talk about that a little bit.
When you say huge background, are you talking about somebody who's been like through a lot of stuff?
Trauma,
Yeah.
trauma.
So one of the things I work really a lot with my clients, and this is I always use my kids as the stories because I don't want to expose my clients. And my
Mhm.
kids are fine with it. I'm
Okay.
gonna throw this in here. Anytime you tell a story about somebody else that is
Hmm.
not your story, you go and ask for permission.
Okay.
Used to tell my kiddo's story, my one kiddo that I just told the story about being a rocket scientist. And after he graduated from his degree, he said, Mom, no more. Can't use my name anymore. So I'm like, okay,
Oh,
right? We always go in and check with them to make sure.
yes.
So if you have this huge backstory and you just dump it all in front of your audience, it's too much. I learned that the hard way when I was on the speaker circuit. I had
Okay.
a situation and I'm going to just, say it here. I won't go into all the details, but
Yeah.
I had one child who was a truth teller in my high conflict family, and he had multiple suicide attempts in one year. I
Mhm.
used to tell everybody when I would speak from the stage, all of the details of all those suicide attempts. I have 4 kids. We were all deeply impacted by this. I
Mhm.
changed that line from all of the story to just this. In that moment after our divorce, we moved through suicide attempts, alcoholism, drug addiction, and many other conflicts, but we got to the other side. And on the other side, we had to decide what to do. It was in the
Mm.
beginning, it was at the other side. And that's how I just, took a 30-minute hooking my audience into so much pain where they just couldn't believe I was still standing, into
Yeah.
seeing there was hope.
Okay. And you're like synopsizing it, but not in a way that diminishes it, but you are touching on the things that make you go, ah, ooh, ow, e, that
Yeah.
that I think can allow people to see, oh, she's been through some stuff, same as me. I mean, we've
It's,
all had some sort of trauma in our lives, right?
Mhm. And when I work with my clients, I really encourage, so any storyteller out there, when you're thinking, this is my trauma and I need to talk about it, take the time. Almost anybody who's been through therapy has created a trauma timeline
Mhm.
where we start and we write down all the bad things that have happened to us so we can deal with them in therapy.
Yes,
Don't do that for your
for your
presentation.
audience.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Instead,
back,
add joy in there. Find all the
yeah,
bad places and add joy.
I love that. And you said start in the middle of the story. And you see this a lot in writing on TV shows. They'll start with Tracker getting, his head knocked around and he's got a bloody nose and everything. And then it'll go 18 hours earlier, he gets the call to go find somebody and blah, blah, blah. And so it often kind of starts in the middle of the story and then it goes back and it builds until the closing. And I think that's a really interesting technique. I hadn't really thought about that before all that much, but I think it makes a lot of sense.
It just reduces that minutia, those details that people get so bogged down in when they're trying to tell this story. And I absolutely do not recommend that speakers who are telling a story memorize the story. I talk about something called remembering the story. It's
Oh,
your story, you will remember it. But if you memorize it, you'll get stuck. And
yeah.
I was a TEDx speaker coach for quite a while. I was a head TEDx speaker coach here in Colorado Springs. And
Okay.
I had one of the people on stage refuse to hear that and memorize the speech. But this is the thing I always tell people. If I ask you where G is in the alphabet, don't you have to go forward and backwards to find
Of
it?
course you do. Yes,
And
absolutely.
if you memorize your presentation and you lose a word, you have to go forward and backwards to find where your place is. So just
Mm.
remember your presentation. It's your story. Those first and last stories have to be really solid, though.
Okay, so let's talk. And by the way, your audience doesn't know what parts you've left out. They don't know what they're missing. And I
Not a
think
clue.
people are always like, but, I have to say this. Let's talk about TED Talks for a second, because isn't however many minutes, what is it, 17 minutes or something like
No
that?
more than 18
No
minutes.
more than 18 minutes. Isn't that like so much harder than doing 60 minutes or 45 minutes?
I find it to be much harder.
Hmm.
And, remember a TED Talk itself, which is different than a TEDx. The
Hmm.
TED Talks is that huge stage where you have to be invited to. It costs like $4,000 to get a ticket, or your local TEDx, which is a franchise.
Okay.
Those are also like 18 minutes. But that's why we use story. And that's why the TEDx and TED model is so about story, because you can
Mhm.
get so much content into a short time telling a story.
Okay. So in your regular talk, let me just ask if this is a good comparison. You might be giving 3 points. In a TED Talk, you're giving one. Am I right?
You could, yes. Sometimes
Okay.
I've worked with TEDx speakers who give 3 points,
Oh,
but you're
really?
covering a big idea and how
Yeah.
you cover that big idea. And so
You-
a way that I help my speakers to understand is we have that clothesline. So you have an opening and closing that are really firm. And then
Yes.
your stories are what I call the shirts in between on the line. And my
Okay.
mama had 6 kids and was a foster parent. So she used that clothesline, and you never knew what was going to be on the clothesline, but
Right.
you knew it was going to be clothes. And so if you will treat your stories as a t-shirt to put up on the line, then you can take them down off the line. And you
Hmm.
choose how many, but once you have the structure of an 18-minute presentation, you can take it to a 40-minute keynote, a 60-minute keynote, or a 2-hour workshop.
Hmm.
You just have to learn that structure.
Okay, that's so good. Wow. You're giving us so much to think about here today. Let's talk a little bit about boo-boos, errors that people might make in speaking. What are some of the common mistakes you see?
Well, the common storytelling mistake is that one thing I said is about the minutia. The
Ah,
other one is my hardest speakers to work with to get to storytelling are those who are writers, those who are authors, because they try to tell a story like it's written, and that doesn't work. We have to use a lot more colorful details. We have to use more cultural symbols, all of that to bring the listener into the story. If I'm reading your book, I can go back if I miss something and find it and I can go through it. But when you're telling a story, there's no stopping. It's just going on. And so
yeah.
it's really important that you set the stage through different ways and don't say he said, she said. Use your body, use your voice to explain that.
Okay, interesting. Writers, have you heard the term murder your darlings?
No, tell me. I
Okay.
didn't know this
So
one.
that's a writing thing. And the idea is that you're letting go of some of your tried and true, some written thing that you've done that you've thought is so brilliant are your darlings. And you
Mhm.
need to be okay letting them go. You need to be okay murdering your darlings. I've talked
I
about this
love
on
that.
the podcast. I know. And I'm sure that that same thing applies when we're talking about some of your stories. When is it time to give up a story?
Well, we never know how our presentations land until we work with a real audience, right? Like I would have never known how painful that story was until I watched myself lose my audience all the time. So you
Mm.
let go of stories when they quit working. You also let go of stories when they quit working for you.
Yes. What if you're just so, oh, if I tell that story one more time, I'm gonna barf. Like, I mean, sometimes you just get tired of hearing yourself saying the same things. And I'm thinking that when you're on the road traveling all the time and speaking, you've got to keep it fresh and interesting for yourself, or else you're going to end up phoning it in, and nobody really wants that.
They don't connect. And two things that I teach on that is Florence Littauer was one of my early mentors. She's written a
Mm.
lot of books, and she was one of my early mentors. And she taught us to be alert to life. So
Mm.
I really recommend everybody. I use a 3x5 index card file, but if you're an Excel spreadsheet person, do it there. And
Hmm.
jot down the stories that happen to you that matter. Don't write the whole thing down because then you become a writer, not a storyteller. But
Right.
just jot down the title of it, what happened, and what you learned from it. So when you
Yes.
get tired of your stories, you can go, you have this whole index box. And I've been doing this since 2010. I have a couple
Really?
index boxes.
Oh, that's so interesting. I do love an index card. I have lots of them around me here right now. I also love, anything visual that allows me to kind of flip through something. I think that's kind of neat, but some people are high tech and they might want it on their phone, or they might, I don't know, keep even voice notes or something like that. But you need to be able to scroll through them to try to be able to look for something new and fresh, something that you can work into the mix. Now, what would be interesting, I'm taking this to kind of like an AI place, is if you put it in something that's really searchable and you added keywords at the end of each story. So this story is about resilience or overcoming or, you know, something trauma. And then you could just search and find all the same. I don't know if that's even possible. There's got to
I
be.
have a feeling that the generation beneath me will figure that all out. I do have mine filed according to my topic. So it's
Yeah.
compassion or learning or wisdom or
Yeah.
a shift in thinking. So I have all sorts of categories like that that apply to
Nice.
what I teach.
Nice. Okay. So let me ask you, have you or any of your clients ever used AI to help shape a story?
We are just starting to play with that.
Hmm.
Um, I know that AI is a thing and I know that it should be out there and I know that it helps us a lot. Like it helps to reduce our time frame. I'm still a little bit nervous to put too much into my stories because they're mine. And
Yeah.
so I want to hold on to them. I don't want AI to take them and give them to somebody else.
Well, if you give the, oh, true, that's true. But if you're giving the search engine all of the elements that are yours, I don't, I think that then you might be shaping it. So we're going to
Yeah.
leave this open for debate
And
and to be
I'm
continued.
older, so
I'm going to
there you
have
go.
somebody on the podcast here shortly who is going to talk to us about how to use AI in speaking in a way that feels authentic. I
Excellent.
think that's our word, right? We don't want it to feel in any way inauthentic. But let's say you get stuck and you're like, geez, I really don't know how to say this. You punch in all the things and then they put together a paragraph for you. Maybe, maybe
I
not. I
think
don't
that
know.
works.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
might work. Okay. Well, I want people to be able to reach out to you and find you. Your coaching, like I said, my clients are just absolutely raving about the work that you've done with them. Thank you so much. Tell everybody how they should connect with you.
The easiest way is through my website, which is jilldaviscoaching.com, but I am very low tech. So if you just want to send me an email, it's askjilldavis@gmail, and I'd love to chat with you.
Okay, wonderful. Jill, thank you so much for giving us some really great ideas. There was some things that you shared that I hadn't really heard before or thought about before, and I think it's terrific to be able to just throw everything out that and start with something fresh just to have some fresh ideas. So thank you so much for being here. If you're listening in, thank you so much for listening. And with that, we're going to say, see you soon, multi-speakers. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Wealthy Speaker Podcast. If you need help building the speaking business of your dreams, head over to wealthyspeakerschool.com and take advantage of our 20-minute next step call. Thanks for listening to the Wealthy Speaker Podcast.